of that coalition here, in particular, Paulina Mendez. We have some of our staff on as well, Jessica Knupp, Tommy Dennison, Aaron Leonard. Thank you all for being here as well. Also, I want to just make sure that you all know of our housemate, we call them. Lenore Ryan University has a diversity L-Ready. It is a class, of course, you can register for that for some more diversity, engagement, inclusion education. So don't forget, Lenore Ryan University is the graduate school here in Asheville. And I want to introduce Nia Davis from the city of Asheville, who is going to, thank you, Nia, for being here so much. She's going to present to us today on intersectionality and everything about it and how it works with us in our daily lives, personal as well as work. So Nia, the floor is yours.
The floor is mine. Hey, y'all. Okay, I will say I don't usually use Zoom, so please forgive me as I navigate this.
Look at you.
Look at me navigating. Everyone can see this? Yes, we're screen sharing. We're good. Awesome. Okay. Well, hey, everyone. My name is Nia Davis. I work for the City of Asheville with the Office of Equity and Inclusion. My formal title is Human Relations Analyst. I work with Paulina. Shout out to Paulina. I know she's out there. But yeah, I'm here to talk to y'all, give y'all an introduction of intersectionality. I think especially now, it's been a very hot button word, and what I've found is that intersectionality is one of those terms that I think has been made really academic and a little inaccessible to people. But my hope is that by the end of this training, everyone has a stronger grasp on what intersectionality is and how to have an intersectional lens, as you navigate through life and through work and all of the things. And just to start off, we're all used to, I think, virtual world by now, but I want y'all to do whatever makes you comfortable. Please stay muted, headphones if helpful. If you want to turn on your camera, fantastic, or if that's allowed. Y'all make sure you're taking care of yourself through the training. And so I don't think I need to go through all of this too much because we're not new to this, but take what you need throughout the training. And so some of the objectives, what I hope for you all to get out of this training is, one, I want you to be able to define intersectionality and understand the origin of the term. Two, I want to give you all some real life examples of how intersectionality impacts policy. And three, I want y'all to make a connection between intersectionality, equity, and inclusion. So I will say through the first part of this, it'll be more heavy on me talking, but then I will give the opportunity for you all to hear other people speak and talk about their experiences with intersectionality, as well as for you all to reflect on it. So that's where we'll hopefully make the real life connection when you hear someone else besides me talk about it. And just some group agreements as we go into this session. So one, I'm asking that you all be willing to stretch a little bit. We have our comfort zones. Asking for you to step outside of your comfort zone just a little bit. So growth can happen. Two, asking for you to accept non-closure on long-term issues. These issues weren't created in a day. They won't be solved in an hour. And we'll be talking a lot about how oppression is compounded and is built on each other. And that could be really overwhelming for folks. So, just asking you all to breathe through it, understanding that this wasn't created in a day. So it's gonna take more than a day to figure it out. Third thing, what's said here stays here, what's learned here leaves here. I mean, I'm sure you all are familiar with a lot of these agreements. Essentially, please take the learning outside of this space, but if people, get personal and please keep identities confidential. Fourth, take space, make space. So if you're the type of person that's very quick to speak, awesome. I'm asking you maybe take a pause or two. If you're not the type of person who usually raises their hand first, I'm asking you to challenge yourself a little bit. And at like asking that you maybe push yourself to participate a little bit. And then the last one is offer what you can, ask for what you need. Again, talking about topics that can be a lot for some folks. So take care of yourself throughout the training. And yeah, if there's anything, I can't see you all. So hopefully these are things that we can all agree to. If not, drop in the chat box. I'm sure somebody will let me know. So I'm moving forward. And there's too many of us to do introductions, but again, Nia Davis, I was like, where do I work? City of Asheville, Human Relations Analyst. I identify as Black, she, her, hers pronouns. And one thing I'm excited about is the weekend. It has been already a long week. So if y'all feel so inclined, you can drop these things in the chat box as well. If not, no worries, there's a lot of us. But hopefully we can make some connections after the training. All right, so this is an opportunity for, before I start talking, for you all to be a little bit engaged in this conversation. So what I'm about to do, I'm about to present a mentee word cloud, and I am asking you all to send in words or phrases that come to mind when you hear intersectionality. I want to kind of see what the group understanding right now is of intersectionality. And if you don't know, that's completely fine. If you're unsure, write that in too. But I'm going to give folks a few minutes to, once it loads, boop, boop, boop. I want to give folks a couple of minutes to go to menti.com, either on your computer or with your smartphone, and type in the code, and soon results will start to come and formulate a word cloud. So again, it's like words or phrases that you associate with intersectionality, what you think intersectionality means. You can keep it brief. We don't need like sentence definitions. So I'll give folks a couple of minutes to get that started. Ooh, this is interesting.
This is good.
Oh, this is so cool. Okay. Wow.
I love the unsure.
Yeah, shout out to people, the no idea. I hear you.
Yep.
Love that. And so hopefully by the end of this, you will have an idea of what it is. If I'm doing my job correctly. If not, let me know. This is awesome. I'm about to say, I'll give folks a couple, a little bit longer because they're still kind of coming in, but both and thinking, power, how systems interact, gender, that seems to be a good one, race, challenging, privilege, compounding, different lenses, sexual orientation.
Ooh, I like the one in the chat, just came in, consideration.
Oh, there's stuff in the chat. Let me look at that. Okay.
That's a really good one.
Ooh. Oh, shout out to y'all for introducing yourselves too. Y'all are great. It's exciting. Okay. I'm gonna try to put that up. How people relate. That's a cool one. Coming together. Inclusive. So do we need a little bit more time? They're coming in still. Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Love that. Yay, adopting a new kitten.
Crystal Sheriff's getting a new kitten.
That's
You've lost
so
your mind.
cool. Awesome. I see the Unsure is getting bigger. Yeah, that's exciting. I'm excited to talk to you about this. I'm hoping, again, like it's a term I think that's been, well, the term, it was based in academia, right? So it was created to be academic, but like we really, I think, have taken a hold of it. And so I want to make sure that this is accessible to folks. All right. Do we feel good? Do we feel good about this list? Anybody else? Give you a minute. Yeah, shout out to Kimberly. Okay, we have somebody who knows. Shout out to Kimberly Crenshaw. We're going to talk about her. But yeah, this list is awesome. So I really appreciate y'all adding. I really appreciate the Unshores. I appreciate, we have comprehensive identity. We have different lenses. We have building. We have making mistakes, exclusion, economic status, gender, race. Saw sexual orientation somewhere in there. Privilege, we'll talk a little bit about that. Compounding, yes, yes, yes. All of these things are really awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And so now that y'all told me what y'all think intersectionality is, I'm gonna show you a video of that breaks down the definition of intersectionality. And again, I think the video does a really good job of being accessible because it's not always the easiest topic. I am over here moving my presentation like I'm on. Here we go. All right, so video time. So this will kind of give you an introduction as to what intersectionality is, and then I'll break it down a little bit from there.
What is intersectionality?
Is this better?
Intersectionality is a way of understanding social relations by examining intersecting forms of discrimination. This means acknowledging that social systems are complicated and that many forms of oppression, like racism, sexism, and ageism, might be present and active at the same time in a person's life. Everyday approaches to building equality tend to focus on one type of discrimination, for instance, sexism, and then work to address only that specific concern. But while the career of a young, white, and able-bodied woman might improve with gender equality protections, an older, black, disabled lesbian may continue to be hampered by racism, ageism, ableism, and homophobia in the workplace. Intersectionality is about understanding and addressing all potential roadblocks to an individual or group's well-being. But it's not as simple as just adding up oppressions and addressing each one individually. Racism, sexism, and ableism exist on their own, but when combined, they compound and transform the experience of oppression. Intersectionality acknowledges that unique oppressions exist, but is also dedicated to understanding how they change in combination. The roots of intersectionality lie within the Black feminist movement, with legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw originating the term. Crenshaw felt that anti-racist and feminist movements were both overlooking the unique challenges faced by Black women. She stated that legislation about race is framed to protect Black men, and legislation about sexism is understood to protect white women. So simply combining racism and sexism together does not therefore protect Black women. Intersectional theory is now applied across a range of social divisions and also to understandings of domination, such as those associated with whiteness, masculinity, and heterosexuality. Intersectionality is not only about multiple identities, and it's not a simple answer to solving problems around equality and diversity. It is, however, an essential framework as we truly engage with issues around privilege and power and work to bring them into the open. Intersectionality means listening to others, examining our own privileges, and asking questions about who may be excluded or adversely affected by our work. As importantly, it means taking measurable action to invite, include, and center the voices and work of marginalized individuals.
All right. And can everyone hear me? Good. Yeah, so that was an introduction video that I think really kind of laid out what intersectionality is. I did want to define it one more time and really focus on Kimberly Crenshaw's definition. And she defined it as the interconnected nature of social categories, race, class, gender, etc., which create overlapping interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. And so really honing in on the creation of the overlapping interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantages is what I'll really be focusing on throughout the presentation. And so one of the main reasons that I am like continuously honing in on the definition of intersectionality is that there are a lot of misconceptions about the term, I think especially in popular usage. And so as we continue the conversation, I want to make sure that we're all taking away the same things. And so one of the things being that intersectionality does not mean identity politics. They talked about like, this is not about adding up your identities, right? This isn't, I have 3 identities, so-and-so has 7 identities, so-and-so has 4 identities. It's more about examining how currently and historically our structures and institutions have been using certain identities for vehicles, as vehicles for exclusion. And so like going throughout this training, like please be thinking about who traditionally has been excluded because of their race, their gender, their sexual orientation, their ability status, their socioeconomic status, etc. Another thing, intersectionality does not support oppression Olympics. And so what oppression Olympics is, it's kind of a term that was, I think, created on the internet, but it's this idea of like putting marginalized people against each other. Like this isn't about who's more oppressed, right? Like, and in fact, it's not about who is more oppressed, but it's also important to examine our own privilege and examine, again, as the video said, who might be adversely impacted by our work. So again, this is not to be this group of people is more oppressed than this group of people. Like that's not what's the purpose. And then lastly, intersectionality recognizes that more than one oppression exists. And it acknowledges that unique oppressions exist. And it's dedicated to understanding how they change in combination with each other. And so we're going to keep going back to how oppression overlaps and compounds on itself. And then again, so I mentioned before, I will do a little bit more of the talking, but I really want to provide y'all with this background information as to how intersectionality was coined and just give examples of sort of intersectional failures in policy. I think, as the video mentioned, intersectionality originated with Black feminist legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw. And so she was finding that when it came to legislation about race, that was designed to protect Black men, and that legislation around sexism was designed to protect white women. And so I know a lot of us in this room kind of have access to policy and are often engaged in conversations around policy. So I wanted to make sure that y'all had kind of real life examples of how these intersectional failures can like manifest in policy. So one of the original cases that Kimberly Crenshaw used when discussing intersectionality was DeGraff and Reed versus General Motors. And so some background on that case, and I'm going to refer to my notes so I can tell you the correct thing. So in 1976, 5 Black women filed a class action Title VII suit alleging that their employer, General Motors, discriminated against Black women. And just some background, so Title VII prohibits employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. And so what the argument was is they argued that seniority-based layoffs had disadvantaged Black women. And again, some more background, General Motors didn't hire Black women until 1964. And so when they started doing seniority-based layoffs in the early 1970s, because of a recession, all of the Black women that were hired after 1964 were laid off, right? And it's one of those things where it's like, if we weren't hiring Black women until this time, like, of course that like Black women, the Black women who were hired have worked there the least amount of time. Like these Black women who worked there could have only been there for the most amount of time, 5-6 years, right? So when it came time for those seniority-based layoffs, they were the first to go. And so the court found that the Black women could not combine the claims of race and sex discrimination because it would be beyond the scope of Title VII. And therefore they said that Black women could not be a protected class, and they must either bring about a race discrimination suit or a sex discrimination suit. And again, going back to the video on intersectionality, right? Like, how difficult would it be to decide, like, oh, is this racism I'm experiencing or is this sexism I'm experiencing? Where is Black women and women of color can experience both simultaneously, and it's hard to separate from each other, right? So that's one of the original court cases that was influential in kind of shaping this definition of intersectionality. Another court case that kind of will make a connection to today is Renee Rogers versus American Airlines. And so Renee Rogers was a Black woman and a flight attendant who sued American Airlines when it decided that when the airline decided that she could no longer wear her hair in cornrows, but instead asked to style her hair in a bun. And American Airlines based their hair change requirement on their grooming policy. But Renee Rogers' argument was that it was discriminatory based off of race and sex. And so the court naturally ruled that both men and women with long hair were impacted by it. So therefore it wasn't a problem. But then taking a step back and looking, if we were using an intersectional lens, right? Like, the courts were not considering how politicized Black women's hair has been. And they obviously didn't consider the historical and cultural importance of wearing braids and different protective styles. And in fact, hair discrimination disproportionately impacts Black people in general, specifically Black women and girls. I'm sure y'all could, Google right now, like there are still cases of Black girls being sent home from school because, they have braids or they are wearing their hair in a certain way. And in fact, and kind of tying this case to today, the Crown Act, which stands for Create a Respectful and Open Workplace for Natural Hair. It's a California law that prohibits the discrimination on hairstyle and hair texture. And that law was signed July 3rd, 2019. So 2019, we're still recognizing that like this hair discrimination is an issue. And again, the importance of when you're intersectional, like, you're recognizing like the impact of both racism and sexism at the same time. And so we're not far removed from these intersectional failures in policies, and especially in today's socio-political climate, like these failures are more present than ever. And so I wanted to make sure I was taking the opportunity to talk about a few things that are happening today and kind of the opportunity for us to make sure we're looking at these things in an intersectional way. So before talking about Black Lives Matter, I did want to provide a little bit of a trigger warning. We'll be discussing state-sanctioned violence. So again, I want you all to take care of yourselves. And so if that's something that is a little triggering to you, then please do what you need to do. But I want to make some connections between like these major events of today and how we can look at these things in a more intersectional way. And so this year, the Black Lives Matter movement has been incredibly relevant, especially with the unarmed murder of so many Black folks at the hands of state-sanctioned violence. And then within activist circles, and some of you all might have picked up on this, some might, but there's really been this push for all Black lives to matter. And so I want y'all to think about, when we think about Black folks specifically who have lost their lives at the hands of state-sanctioned violence, a lot of us think about George Floyd, we think about Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Trayvon Martin. A lot of us can kind of go on, but like, who are the names of the people that we don't know? I think that's really important to think about. And so not only does state-sanctioned violence impact Black men, but it impacts Black women and Black trans folks. And again, like, this isn't an Oppression Olympics thing. Like, in no way, shape, or form am I saying to take the attention off of Black men who have died at the hands of police violence. But I think it's really worth thinking about the names that we don't know and the names that don't make the mainstream. And some of us might recognize a few Black women who have died at the hands of police brutality, like there's Sandra Bland, Rekia Boyd, Corinne Gaines, A lot of us are familiar with Breonna Taylor, and this is even, checking myself and pushing myself to do the education on my part. Like, it was only through listening to Kimberly Crenshaw's podcast, Intersectionality podcast, that I'm hearing the names Natasha McKenna, Tanisha Anderson, and Michelle Cousseau. And so I'm just bringing it back. Like, if we don't know that an issue exists, like, then how do we push for accountability, right? Like, how does the combination of racism and sexism contribute to the stories that make the mainstream, the stories that we are continuously hear about, and therefore the stories that really shape what we care about and what we value, right? And then even taking a step back from looking at the impacts of police brutality and state-sanctioned violence. Like, when we think about all Black lives mattering, like, again, it's so important to look at compounding oppression, right? So it's like, we talk about race, but I want to bring in sexual orientation and gender identity and expression into the conversation a little bit. And so just giving an example, the life expectancy for Black trans women is 35 years old. It's 35. And so we cannot talk about health outcomes and the impact of violence without being intersectional, right? Because my life expectancy as a cisgendered Black woman looks different than that of a Black trans woman, right? Like, and so if we just looked at race and we didn't look at gender and gender expression, like, we would be missing a really big part of that narrative, and we wouldn't be able to do justice when looking at the impact on all Black lives. Another one, COVID-19, very real for a lot of us right now. I think as we've kind of gone through COVID, we've continuously heard about vulnerable communities that were put at higher risk for COVID-19. And like, some of these communities included the elderly, BIPOC communities, BIPOC standing for Black, Indigenous, people of color, essential workers, that often included low-income workers, right? And folks who lived in rural communities. But like, within these vulnerable communities, like, there are compounding oppression. So for example, 2/3 of low-wage workers are women, and disproportionately women of color. And that information is from the National Domestic Workers Alliance. And so a really salient example that that came up for me is like thinking about the impact on caregivers and home care workers during COVID-19. And so if the vast majority of these caregivers are women of color, immigrants, and low-wage workers, right? Like, these are things that are happening all at the same time. And like, historically and systemically, like, these communities have been stripped away of social safety nets, period. And so like, we can't have a holistic conversation about populations that have been made vulnerable, especially during the pandemic, without looking at class, gender, and race. And like, we have to like look at these things all at the same time. We can't just look at one section and say that tells the whole story. And the last one I'll touch on, and then I will stop talking and give other people the opportunity to speak. Intersectional vulnerability was in voting. And so this past election, I'm sure we have like election fatigue, so I apologize. But this past election, there was a large push to vote, and we saw nationally that resulted in long lines and wait times for early voting. Like, we don't have election day off as a country, right? So think about the impact that this could have on low-income workers who might not have the spare time to wait in long lines. And think about who is disproportionately represented in low-income workers. Think about caregivers who are responsible for picking up children and who are disproportionately represented in that group as well. Like, the folks that, again, who have these compounding oppressions. And so I think it's just important to continue to think about the folks who had to work a lot harder to make sure that their vote was counted. And then the last thing I'll touch on in terms of voting, like, there have been multiple tactics used, it's not a surprise, that have been used to suppress the vote in Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. Black and Indigenous people are especially vulnerable when it comes to voting ID laws. And so when you're living in poverty or you're living in incredible rural areas, that provides an additional set of challenges when it comes to access. And so when thinking about addressing voter suppression, you can't just address socioeconomic status, especially considering how poverty has been racialized. You have to think about the barriers that have been put in place for communities made vulnerable by our oppressive systems. and how that impacts the voter turnout in these communities. So I just wanted to kind of make it really relevant to right now. Like those are three really big things that have been happening right now, and just the opportunity for us to ask additional questions to make sure that we're not just looking at race, but we're looking at how race informs folks of different genders experience, folks inform different socioeconomic statuses, and just like how all of those things could provide barriers for individuals. Okay, so as I've talked about intersectionality, I've spoken heavily about race, class, and gender, but of course our society uses multiple identities as vehicles for exclusion. And so you're going to see two videos of individuals discussing the importance of intersectionality to them. And so y'all have a reflection question. And so I would want to give y'all the opportunity to like jot down some thoughts, to think about some thoughts kind of surrounding the reflection question. And then after the video, I'll bring it back to a large group discussion. So I'm hoping that you all will talk about not only your reflection, but will also comment on the videos and what you're getting from the videos. So I am going to play, and hopefully this works. If not, I know how to fix it this time.
My name is Singh. I'm a musician and social justice educator. Race and religion. We all have multiple identities, and those multiple identities are intersecting to affect our experience, to affect the way that we walk through the world. I am South Asian. I also consider myself Punjabi. I am a Sikh, as in S-I-K-H, the faith. I am a cisgender man. I'm straight, and I grew up middle class, and I'm able-bodied. Structural racism, structural religious oppression or Christian hegemony, structural patriarchy or sexism, all of these things are actually interlocked in society. Intersectionality means that we acknowledge that we actually all have to fight against all forms of oppression if we actually truly want to get free. I can't think about my racial identity as a brown person or as a South Asian American without also experiencing sort of the racialized aspects of being a Sikh, right? Being someone who wears a turban, who has a beard, those are very racialized things, even though for me, they have to do with my religion. I haven't been able to walk through this world or to walk through this country as a brown-skinned, turban-wearing, beard-having man without that being just very apparent in the stares that I get, in the derogatory comments, the terrorists, the Osamas, the ISIS. My religion, Sikhism, has sort of been compounded with this vilification of Muslims and Muslim-looking people at large. You know, that might be sort of technically religious oppression, for example, or it might be tied to Islamophobia. But those things are deeply tied to racism and white supremacy more broadly. My race, my gender, my religion might very well have consequences on whether I make it walking down the street alive. That's the reality that we're living in. So to not talk about them, to not confront those things very directly, to me is really the divisive thing, right? That's allowing these divisions and allowing these hierarchies and allowing these injustices to continue perpetuating themselves. If we don't stand up against them, if we don't amplify our voices against these things, they're going to continue on whether we like it or not. What's been harder is thinking about my intersectional self along the lines of the ways I experience privilege, right? So my cisgender maleness, right? My heterosexuality, the class privilege I had growing up, those things have always been much harder to look at. If we have sort of a choice whether to implore one or more of our identities, it probably means that we have a relative amount of privilege. If we really want to be intersectional, we really have to challenge ourselves to also implore the ways which we experience privilege and the ways that we can be in solidarity with folks that don't have as much privilege.
All right. I realized I didn't actually give y'all that much time to reflect. So I do want to give y'all a minute or so, but I would love to hear just again, like kind of a reflection to why is race important to consider along with other identities, but just general reactions to what Sonny said, I think, and how his words have like challenged your perception on intersectionality. So I can be quiet for a minute or so and let y'all gather your thoughts. But yeah, I would love to bring this back to group discussion.
I'd like to invite anybody who'd like to say something to raise their hand, and I will promote you to a panelist so that we can see and hear from you.
So any reflections, any thoughts? Any answers to, and Sonny touched on it, but like your original answer to why is race important to consider along with other identities?
Steve Busey, I know you're out there. Give us your take on it. There he is. Hi, Steve.
Hello.
Hi. Give us some insight on what you feel.
Well, yeah, I can only say, you know, Nia asked the question of race
Mhm.
and intersectionality considered. I mean,
Mhm.
I think that for me, you know, often race is what we consider. It's almost like it's like the first thing to be considered, in the intersectionality of it all compounds it. Sonny's story was super obvious
Mhm.
of us not knowing a lot about other religions, but putting it all together into a preconception of what a Muslim person looks like to me or to someone. And there's there are many different groups, but doesn't race kind of foreshadow all of that, and
Right.
how wrong that is, right?
Right. That's what I was thinking from the start. Just from the obvious, race is, if you will, the first noticeable. You can't notice someone's religion typically by what they look like. Using the video as an example, you could, if you knew. If you don't know that a Sikh wears a turban, then you just think maybe that guy wears a turban. So I think it's the start of how to get to the other identities. Yes, I agree with you.
Well, you know, Amy flipped that on its head, and you know, if white is race, think about all the different religions, and think about how extreme
Yes.
different white people are.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Sure. That's
and
exactly what I'm saying. Mm-hmm.
you know, so I don't know. It just
Okay.
seems like that goes both ways, and it's something that you have to consider all of the things that a person is in their lives.
Yes.
Beyond religion, beyond race. And that's one thing that
Yes.
this has been really helpful for me.
Good. Good. I'm glad it's helpful. Trista, did you have a comment? If you'll unmute yourself, or Aaron, do you have to unmute her?
Trista is telling us she doesn't have a microphone, so I will.
Oh.
I put her on the spot. And
Kristen, what about you?
Hey,
Kristen.
I got promoted to panelist. Yeah, so I dropped. Surprise, just doing dishes. Yeah, I put in the chat that I really appreciate that he reminded us to not just focus on our identities that experience oppression, but all of our identities, so we can, better like examine the privilege that we do have and better like empathize with other people's experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And also, yeah, just to piggyback off of what you all were saying, race is really crucial in kind of the it's something that we can't like hide or decide to disclose.
Right.
It's
right.
It presents. So it's not something like class or religion that you have an option to share or not share.
Right. Great. Thank you
for that. I do want to bring some attention to some of the comments in the chat box. Jay said, I think race may be the greatest determinant of outcomes in terms of health, safety, and wealth. So to exclude it from considerations of identities makes any conversation woefully incomplete. Paulina said also just thinking about how different identities like religion and disability to a certain extent can be racialized or become more of an ethnicity. I think something when I first saw this, when I first watched this, what kind of came to mind is like when talking about this like racialization of being, and he's sick, but people assume that he's Muslim, and that Islamophobia kind of hops out. Like, would folks have the same reaction to a white man in a turban as a brown man in a turban? Like, I think we see folks a certain way. And so, and when he was talking about his own personal safety, like whether he might make it home or not, it's the combination of his religion and his brownness that are contributing to that anxiety, right? So thank y'all for sharing. I do have one more video to show you all. I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna give y'all a little bit more time to reflect on it. So it's not, why aren't you moving?
My name is Singh.
Here we go. How does utilizing an intersectional framework impact racial justice? So I will give y'all like a minute or so to reflect on that, and then we will watch Kay talk about the intersection of race and disability. So again, just if you want to jot down some like just thoughts before the video, that'd be great. Just kind of be thinking about it. And then I will hit play. And we'll hear Kay.
Kay Barrett, activist, cultural worker, and disability justice advocate. Race and disability, race and gender, race and class. I can't go to a store or a doctor's office or a date and not be seen as brown, trans with a cane. There's no way. And I'm not gonna choose any of those things. I do not want to minimize or dictate how people live and experience and identify. Intersectionality is really super critical to me. I'm not just attacked because I'm trans. I'm attacked because I'm brown and I'm disabled. People are being imprisoned, criminalized, harmed, not given jobs, not given medical support. They're not adequately being loved. It's critical that we get those resources, and it's critical that we get those resources from that community. Every day I'll be on a train and someone will, try to get a seat at the, disability access seating. And depending on that person, depending on how they see me and my masculinity, right? Brown masculinity is not supposed to be vulnerable. Gender nonconformity, are you a boy or a girl? And then I'm young, so you're not really disabled. So all of these things are coming into play on a frequent basis. And it happens when I'm at the medical office, when I'm with the doctor, how many times I'm misgendered. So if they see my brownness, we just want to talk about your brownness. When I'm in white queer spaces, like, let's just talk about you being transgender or queer. When I'm in very able-bodied, fit, radical people of color spaces, they don't really want to discuss access or the needs of my community being disabled. Real talk, white people are treated very different in the trans community than brown people, than Black people, than Latino people. Real talk, people with disabilities, oftentimes it's a lot of white people, cisexual, rich people who can afford healthcare, and that is not my community. For me, what's super pivotal is to acknowledge that race doesn't just move everything along, but that it interprets and informs all the other parts of me. It's because somebody is brown and trans. It is because somebody is physically disabled or perceived as crazy, right? And brown and Black. And those things inform each other. When somebody says, oh, that trans person of color is so lazy, they don't know how to get a job. Well, A, that's ableism. They think that they can't work. B, sexism, and C, anti-Blackness is a racism, right? So all of those things are tools, are weapons happening simultaneously on me, on you. I think it's really critical that we engage in dialogues that might make us uncomfortable. If we don't address that depth, our level of depth, and also the level of depth to which we are being harmed and limited, I don't think we're going to be able to really do groundbreaking work or innovative work to address our needs. And in order to do so, we have to not just see race in a vacuum.
All right. So again, similarly to last time, if people want to share their reflections, how does utilizing an intersectional framework impact racial justice? Want to reflect on anything that Kay said, that would be great. I'll give folks a minute or so to type in the chat box, or if folks want to speak aloud, that would be awesome as well.
Of course, I'm going to speak aloud. I'm that person. It's funny when you started, Nia, you were like, if you're that person that speaks first, that's me. I think the first thing I thought of was that Kay brought up a scenario that we as humans in general are judgmental. And she walks in the room, or Kay walks in the room, I just assume her gender as well. Brown, transgender with a disability, we judge instantly. And that's where I know I need to step back and take a breath. And I think as humans, we all need to take a breath, that our lack of understanding needs to be left at the door in that scenario of being judgmental. If we just let the person be the person, and then we would be educated on the things that we don't know, we could maybe eventually drop some judgmentalness. And I'm just going to throw out there, the two videos, of all the videos in the world that you could pick from, the two you picked are spot on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was hard picking videos.
I'm sure, but these are spot on. Thank you. Okay, I'll hush.
Oh, someone raised their hand. Two people raised, oh my goodness, people raising their hands. I don't know how to pull up the chat box, y'all. I'm sorry if you can see me struggling over here.
Across the bottom bar, if you'll just hover, it says chat. There you are.
Where? Oopsie. Did anybody else have any? I saw a couple folks raise their hands. I don't know how to.
I can go if that's a good time.
Okay.
Okay. Well, hi. I actually got to virtually attend the Facing Race conference last week that's put on by Race Forward, who did these videos. And two things that were mentioned that I've been thinking a lot about have been, are that intersectionality is, let me see, actually, let me go back to my notes, because intersectionality is really threatening to people in power. And then the other thing that they mentioned I've been thinking a lot about is that those, people that are closest to the pain, whatever the issue that may be that we're looking at, the people that are closest to the pain are often the ones, or almost always the ones with the solutions. And I've been thinking about those two things a lot and how they relate to bringing in different identities into approaches and solving problems, and how centering those different identities will lead to, not only their freedom and their, lifting up their power and sharing power, but to everybody's. And so that's why I think it'd be really important to bring in those identities for both to, address that threatening sense of intersectionality and sharing power, and also to center those identities to finding solutions.
Thank you. Anybody else want to comment? We can take maybe one more. This is over at 1, you said? Okay. Let's say, well, it's about to be 1. So I'm going to move on. And so I don't think we will have too much time, unfortunately, to dive in. This is kind of just more conversation for the group, but I would like to open myself up for additional conversation if folks were interested. Oh, now the chat pops up. Okay, I'll have to go through that. But so one of the main things, I pulled out quotes from both Sunny and Kay, and some of y'all already touched on the quote from Sunny, but what he was saying is, what's been harder is thinking about my intersectional self and the way I experience privilege. Those things are much harder to look at. If you really want to be intersectional, we really have to challenge ourselves to implore the ways in which we experience privilege. And so what I wanted to have the group kind of talk about is, why isn't this working? Is how can you challenge yourself to implore the ways in which you experience privilege, right? And so as we're kind of coming to an end, again, I don't think we'll have time to really bring it to the large group, but I think that's something that's a really important takeaway, is thinking about how you can look at your own privilege and challenge yourself to think about how you experience privilege. And then I saw in the chat box, I can absolutely share this PowerPoint. I have no problem with that. And then something that Kay said that I found particularly powerful is, race just doesn't move everything along, but it interprets and informs all the other parts of me. And I think so much, a lot of us focus really heavily on racial equity. And so takeaway question and something for I would love for y'all to think about. Y'all can also, I'll provide my information if folks want to have additional conversations surrounding this. But how can we be intentional about incorporating an intersectional lens in our work, right? So if it's moving everything along, and I think Kay put it really well, where it's because they are brown and disabled, they are brown and in transgender. And so just really thinking about how we can be intentional about that race and because if we just stop at race, right, we're not telling a complete story.
We're just starting the story, actually.
I'm sorry, say it again.
I feel like it's just starting the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, and I think, and race is so important to talk about because it informs all these other parts, but it's just like, again, just even going back to the Black trans women, life expectancy is 35. Like my life expectancy is not 35 as a cisgendered Black woman, right? So like it's race and really making sure that we're diving deeper into that story. So again, I will wrap up very quickly, just some next steps. I really encourage y'all to think about the questions that Sunny and Kay posed. Again, I can share this PowerPoint so y'all can have it for reference. Continue to educate yourself around things surrounding intersectionality. Kimberly Crenshaw does a podcast called Intersectionality Matters, and I think it can be found on all platforms that you can stream your podcast. And she's been doing a great series that started, I think, sometime in April about the intersectional vulnerabilities that COVID has exposed. And then as 2020 will continue to be 2020, she's, has covered the election, COVID, the protest. And so it's been a really interesting deep dive on like this intersectional lens and commenting on all of these things that have just been happening in front of us. Connect, again, I will provide my information if y'all want to continue to have conversations surrounding intersectionality. I am here for that. And y'all keep at it. It's not easy. There's a lot of thoughtfulness, I think, is required in doing this work, and a lot of challenging, challenging norms and like the way that we're used to doing things. And so I just encourage y'all to stay encouraged and to, keep doing the work, because again, these problems weren't created in a day. So we need folks to keep at it. Last but not least, this quote really keeps me grounded in doing the work that I do and I'm passionate about. But it's, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound with mine, then let us work together. So I encourage you all, let's work together. So Thank you so much.